asking beginner students, depending on the problem, it's not about whether they're beginner or kind of well into their PhD, but the basics you have to have them in your thinking completely understood. Right? It shouldn't be like, okay, I know I can do this, I can just ask the model to do it for me. No, you will need to have some intuition for when these bounds will work, when these things will get stuck, and the only way to come about is by practice. Right? So it's a lot like math courses, right? You take a textbook and work through every exercise in them, you learn something. In the same way, for certain things, you should ask your students not to do something. And whether or not they'll follow it is up to them, but as always. But that's something that you should definitely ask. And for the second question, maybe I should not give such a bad impression. My use of the slot machine is a little bit better in that I think of all these random ideas that I had 10 years ago or whenever, right? So, you know what? Maybe this particular random math skill might be useful for something. Now I'm tempted to ask the model for that. Maybe I saw some big connection which I didn't pursue because the odds were low that it would work, and it takes significant amount of time to invest. Right? So those things I definitely tried out on the slot machine. None of my ideas were that good. So it's good that I didn't waste much time, but that's one thing. The other thing is this brute force search, which I strongly discourage anyone from doing. Have some intuition for why you think something is solvable for this model, or why you think you might be the person to test it out.
Yeah, so my experience is completely different. I basically found AI tools to be completely useless with my actual mathematical research. And what I'm finding out is that it really depends on the field. So I do not know in computer science whether there's some fields where there's more useful or not, but that will probably, my guess is that it's going to just be different for different people. But one thing that happened earlier this week, I was at a conference in AI and algebraic geometry, and a person there that I know, our areas of mathematics are not too far apart. He basically, in an afternoon, solved his student's thesis problem. This was a problem that the student was supposed to have worked on for the next 2 years, and an AI model just did it. And now, what does that mean? Well, it's really hard because that problem, probably the advisor could have done it in a couple of weeks if they had really put their mind to it. But it was intended as a way for the student to kind of work their way up through the theory and understand how things work until they manage to solve it. So what do? You stop giving problems like this? Or do you, and I think that's what really going to have to happen, give problems like this, but with the understanding that students may now work on it, but really has a much shorter period of time to work on it by themselves, and at some point they should just trust it, send it to the AI system. But what I want to say is that it becomes responsibility of an advisor to know whether a problem is, just like before, one would know whether a problem is reasonably solvable with current techniques and makes for a reasonable student project. Now you have to know, is it something that an AI tool could just one-shot? And if so, why are you giving it to the student? Maybe there's still a good reason to do it, okay? But you have to do it with that in mind.
I want to say something, Pravesh, about whether young students should use AI or not use AI. I actually think AI is a fantastic tool. I encourage people to use it in the right way in every span of your career, even as an undergrad. Because, say you're a student, you sit in a classroom, you're trying to follow, but you're not really sure. You look at the lecture notes, you don't really understand something. You paste that thing into the AI and ask, can you explain to me this part in more detail? So it really can give you a personalized way of learning exactly where, maybe you come, different people come prepared in different ways. Some people come prepared, it's very easy for them, this is things they did in high school or elementary school, whatever, we have all sorts of, and some people come less prepared, and they need more kind of assistance. And is like a Google+++, and I think that's great. But as I said before, you need to use it carefully. Not use it to solve your problems, but use it to help you understand what you do not understand. So there's different ways of using it, but I'm not a fan of not using it.
Yeah, I guess I'll use a time-honored trick on panels, which is to reject the binary, as in use it versus not use it. I think for some of their work, I think this again gets back to the distinction between I think having a really well-defined notion of practice, the way pianists and violinists and varsity football players have. I think you should pick X hours per day. You can choose, we can figure out what X is, we can optimize that. There's some interior optimum for it, in which you turn off the devices, you sit with maybe even a physical printout of the paper, and you just work through it. You sit with a physical book and you work through it. And you're developing skills that way. And then during other times of the day, for Y hours per day, where X plus Y is less than 8 or 12, whatever much you want to work per day, then you use the tools, you try to make as much progress as you can on your problems. And I think these are compatible, right? It's possible to do both of these things in the same way that it's possible to practice for the football game today and then play the football. You play the football game with full padding and you exert all the caloric expenditure you want. And during practice, you do things that don't injure yourself and you work on certain repetitive skills that you wouldn't do on the football field. I think it's possible to do both, and I think it's useful to do both. On the slot machine usage of it, yeah, I again, in the same way that I would make a distinction between the open problem from the 1985 combinatorial paper versus the theory made up. On the slot machine thing, there were two activities you guys are describing that I think it was very different. One is think of famous open problems, just plug them in and go, hey, make it work. Versus, we all have, pads of paper from literally 20 years ago where we were like, oh, this would be cool if this worked out. And you're literally the only person who knows this question. Because you haven't really told anybody, it's just sitting there. And it's this amazing way of revisiting your past. You're actually communing with your past self. I mean, I'm always struck by how many of these technologies let us revisit our past, right? So, to go back to chess one more time, when I was a summer intern at IBM Yorktown with Prabhakar in 1995, there was a demo day at IBM Watson, and there was Deep Blue. You can play it. So I played a game, and I dutifully wrote it down. And I spent the next 30 years wondering, how close did I come to drawing that game? It felt like somewhere in there, and I had the game written down, so I jumped into Stockfish. And of course, there was no moment when I couldn't draw the game, but there was this one moment when Deep Blue had a single move it had to find to keep winning, and it found it, of course. But it was a way of revisiting my 30-year-ago self in a way that And so I think we can do that with mom. You can go back to yourself in grad school, going, I really wish I could have. And that I think that's valid, right? That's not you pulling a slot on a slot machine because you're the only person who could do that. The only person who understood that question. And so I think whereas I agree that going through a list of open problems and just copy pasting them in is sort of.
But for that, you need a John Kleinberg memory, which most of us don't possess.
Or you have pads of paper, you have notepads. I feel like a lot of us have notes files of things we wish we could have solved, but one last time on the question of practice, there's this little cautionary thing in the back of my mind that is a topic for some future panel, not today, which is, if this were 1957 and we had just seen the first Fortran compiler, we would all be really earnestly saying and believing, look, these high-level programming languages like Fortran are cute, but we'll always need to be able to program in assembly. Because only humans writing an assembly language will be as efficient. A compiler will never create code as efficient as you could do if you're manually deciding what goes in which register. And we would have been 100% wrong, right? Eventually, you do not need to program assembly. You don't even need to know what is the instruction set of the chip you're using in order to write good code. But the reason that's not a topic for today is it took several decades for the field to get to that point. But I say that just to say, it's not a given that these things we're saying that seem self-evident will always be true. There's something true now.
I want to add one thing to what Yael mentioned is use of AI tools is both a great power for understanding, but also a handicap. In the sense that sometimes you have something that you don't understand, and I did this to my undergrads too, which is don't just go immediately ask them. Okay? There's something where you struggle through it. Even if it's something was not taught very well, sometimes bad talks are good. You go to the talk, you don't understand anything, it's written badly, then you think, okay, maybe somebody should go and do it better. And through that struggle, something gets fired up in your brain and will be used down the line. So at least wait a little bit before, just prompting the model to explain this concept to me. Instead, struggle through it, little.
I want to try to summarize this discussion about how to use AI with this analogy of fast food, which is that when fast food was new, people didn't know about they ate a lot or had bad habits, and soon eventually there was a culture setting where we know that it's okay to have fast food in limited amounts, and we should exercise as well. And so maybe we need to get there with AI.
Yeah, I agree.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I guess we should open the floor for questions and discussions.
So panel, I wanted to ask the following question. So it feels like underlying the discussion, there's like the anxiety of we feel that we may become obsolete in terms of our role to play in mathematics. But do you think there's also a question that is even more daunting, which is the obsolescence of mathematics itself, in the sense that maybe we just build a tool that is going to allow us to arrive much more quickly to those firm boundaries of all the questions that are independent of piano arithmetic or ZF, etc. And so in that sense that our role will forever just become to be presenters of all the theories that would have been explored, and knowing that we cannot move past those kind of boundaries. And I make a parallel with Western music. So it was once a booming field in the 18th century, 19th century, 20th century, and it felt like all the work that has been done, although it's an infinite space, sort of showed us that we went as far as we could in this system of tonal music. So do you think that's something that, do you believe in this thesis?
I think I can answer that places. So I don't see that. Okay? And one reason that I don't see that is that, for example, there's been an enormous amount of effort that's been pushed into formalization, into this kind of MATLAB and the libraries. And the people who have been halfway between this community and the pure math community, they report to me that the main problem they have is that MATLAB is growing, covering more and more of mathematics. But mathematics itself is growing faster than MATLAB is growing. So they are not able to catch up with the amount of mathematics that humans are currently inventing and trying to put it in a language that you can just directly put in the machine. So I currently do not see the end of the road. Now, again, nobody knows the future, but given current technologies, that doesn't seem to be a problem we are facing.
Yeah, I guess I find the cautionary story of Western tonal music, it's an interesting example that I think we should all think about. But I think we can also think of other aesthetic forms like written fiction that did not come to an end, right? So in some sense, it's a predicate that appears to apply to some disciplines and not to others. And the real question is where math comes down. I do think of math as sort of inexhaustible in some sense. Right, again, I go back to this sort of 1900 Hilbertian tree of mathematics. It's like, in some sense, that was all mathematics. So in one sense, mathematics ended the instant you say it's just this tree, that's it. But I do think, in terms of what we find interesting, what sort of is exciting to us, what's useful to us, that curational activity, I just don't yet see the models becoming very good at that. And I think, so on the one hand, I think they're not very good at targeted search toward what's interesting. On the other hand, we have to remember, the combinatorial nature of mathematics is that there are an unbelievably large number of short, interesting statements that you can make in mathematics, right? That's the nature of sort of the combinatorial space that we're searching. So it's really not plausible, both the...
A lot of them are undecidable. The issue is that a lot of them are undecidable.
I mean, sure, there are undecidable statements, but there are also a lot of decidable statements that we can still prove, right? I just don't see us running out of those.
Maybe. creativity. I'm not sure, I don't know if to say pessimistic or optimistic, but it may, actually. So I have kind of a funny story. I was thinking, what should I send the panel? And I talked about with John yesterday. He said, you should ask ChatGPT. So I did. I went to ChatGPT and asked him, are you gonna, are you gonna do everything better than us? He's like, no. I'm really good at answering questions and proving theorems. I'm not good at actually posing the questions. You humans are very good at posing the questions. For example, and then he went on and on about all the great questions that we pose. So I wrote him like, well, seems like you're pretty good at posing questions. And he's like, yeah, that's uncomfortably true.
I mean, one thing to keep in mind is, we often think of many of these things as a total order. It's definitely not true. And I think you mentioned it at some point about sort of convergence of the different models to kind of the same kind of thinking, and that training us all also to converge to the same mode of thinking. And that's very dangerous. And even in my own research, it's happened that mathematicians who no question consider way better than me at anything that they would touch upon, did solve a problem that I was able to make progress on, that we were able to make progress on. Why did that happen? It's random. It's not a total order. So maybe our metrics will change. So that's also something to keep in mind.
Thank you. Do you think papers and publications should remain the currency of academic life, or should hiring departments and faculty should looking beyond papers and publications in, say, hiring decisions, etc.?
I mean, I think that has yet to be seen. Like, at the moment, so I mean, let's start with first principles. You discover something, you have to communicate it to the rest of the world. You're going to do that in some form factor, right? Let's suppose we call that thing a paper. So at some level, I feel almost by definition there'll be something that is paper-like. Now, you could say that won't be a paper, it'll be an interactive object that they put up that will, in an agentic way answer questions about the result. That would be an interesting way to do it. There are a lot of interesting form factors it would take, but I guess I would start from the question of do we believe there's still going to be scientific communication from the originator of a result to the audience? And the answer, I think, has to be yes. And then I find that less tautological and more reassuring, just because now it becomes an implementation question of how we're going to do this. And I would imagine over time the form factor of the paper is going to change in some ways, but possibly not as much as we expect. I think the volume of output is going to change. And I think it goes back to the devaluing, right? That in some sense, the pulling of the slot machine metaphor, I think is kind of useful because what causes you to stop pulling the slot machine is that what comes out of it is less and less valuable, right? The fact that you can get this thing by just having it spill out means you're ultimately going to stop doing that.
I think one thing to have in mind is that the academic community, this academic community, my academic community, they're part of much larger structures, and those structures are not going to be able to adapt that quickly. So it's easy for somebody to say, I would like for things to be done differently. But whatever it is you're doing differently has to be understandable to department hiring committee, has to be understandable to a dean, has to be understandable to a university-wide committee, and probably all the way up to the provost. Okay, the dean board.
Push back on this a little bit and say, we, as a theoretical computer science a community, we make our rules and we may pay for them, but we decided we don't publish materials. We just decided that. We're you know what, this is too slow, doesn't make any sense. Nobody wants to sit and review so carefully, spend so much time reviewing. We're just going to post things, we're going to put them in our conferences. Nobody reviews them too carefully. We read 10 pages and kind of hope for the best. We have our own incentive for not making a mistake, because if we do, it's very embarrassing and it hinges on our reputation. And that's it. And now universities need to deal with it. And you're right that sometimes it requires us saying, well,
To make the universities accept.
I wanted to ask, we have this great tool, we can do great science, fine, but then there was a lot of discussion of human cost, what would it mean to have that as the discussion of human cost at the center, what guardrails we would want to put, what are the different parameters of the human cost, and so on. Like have some discussion on the human cost.
Okay, so let me take a rough code here, which is first as a mood, how much has the new tool made you, let's say, more worried about your career? Okay, I see a lot of answers. I think that's the first human cost, I would say, which is the psychological impact that it is having. And I think maybe it's not something that came up here, which is how all of this is affecting the pipeline also. Not just the people here, but the next generation of people coming up. And I think, we have to be a little bit careful in making predictions. As a very good friend of mine who doesn't like to make predictions says people and predicted that people are very bad at making predictions. There's a downside to saying that, okay, AI will, subsume us. It could be very well be true. It could very well be true. But the biggest downside to that is what I'm seeing here, which is a lot of worry and angst and killing the pipeline, which we have to address. It's a very hard problem. I don't have a good answer to that. But it's something that, as Pravesh said, you have to have these conversations with your students and maybe something at the global level, as a community, we should make some changes to address that. I don't think it's an easy problem to solve. It has to come from the community as well.
I know I raised my hand and earlier I said, AI basically can't do anything that I do, so I'm not concerned with that. And the reason that I raised my hand is that I'm worried about much bigger scale issues, which is what is the case that we are making for basic research to the funders? And I think for 70 years, this case has been straightforward to make because the policy leaders, the people who decide, have had ingrained in their mind the idea that, coming from this public moment, that investment in basic research pays off. And there's been a generational change, and the boomers are going away, and I think it's a sad thing that the boomers are going away. And the new generation has a different perspective, and they think that AI is going to be the thing that's going to change the world for the better, or whatever. And it's the view that basic research is essential may not be there anymore. So my view is that that is the fundamental thing that mathematicians, computer scientists should be focusing on. Those of us who think that basic research is still valuable, how to make this case in the new world.
And I think we have to. I feel like we have to continue making the argument that a lot of what the research community is doing, again, is this training and mentorship. And that I think has been an argument we've made effectively. I think we have to make it additionally strongly. And I think it's been a fair argument when we've made it, because when you look at where grant money gets spent, by far the biggest wedge in the pie chart is on GRA support, on literally paying the salaries of PhD students who are doing work on the project, right? If you have a small grant, that's where the money goes. If you have a big grant, that's where the money goes, right? There are, particular cases, like if you're building a giant telescope to scan the outer galaxy, then you might have an equipment grant for something else. But fundamentally, NSF and NIH and DARPA, it mainly goes toward paying the salaries of people that are training to be engineering researchers. And I think we have to continue relentlessly making that argument, because we're a long distance from AI becoming the workforce. And if we get to the point where AI becomes the workforce, we have much bigger problems than what arguments we're going to make in our courses.
I wanted to say about the human cost. I agree with you. I agree completely with John. And I think that the worry about, when you ask, are we worried about the job? It occurred to me, we're worried about much more than the job. Okay, we're worried about the world, and the job is a small part of it. We live in a place with a lot of uncertainty, in a time with a lot of uncertainty, and that's worry. You know, it's a very natural way of dealing with uncertainty, worry. But with that, so I'm just acknowledging, you know, we live in uncertainty, we worry, that's human. With that, I agree with John that, you know, we continue to do what we do, what we know how to do. We use the tools in the way that are most effective. We continue to train young generation who hopefully will have great careers as well, even though we live in uncertainty. And that's all we can do, you know. And trying to make the uncertainty that's ahead of us a little nicer by working on problems that may help, like AI alignment, for example, for others. I think that's what we can do.
Let me say one thing. To funders, we can say, hey, look, we trained the AI. So we have, you know, $3 trillion companies coming out of computer science, or at least many of those people were trained as computer scientists, funded by NSF, NIH grants. So that's something that we can draw attention to.
So I wanted to add one thing, like, you know, obviously the biggest human cost of this is to the younger people in our community. And I see this in like 100 discussions I've been having, I guess, in the last few months with my students and people of their same age. One thing I tell them, and one thing that might be good to hear, even if, you know, I don't know how much it helps, is that I actually, even though the primary cost might be to the younger people, if the field gets to a stage where the younger people are having troubles enough that the pipeline breaks, the job of the people who are sitting here, with or without tenure, also won't be worth doing. So eventually, you know, it will affect everyone. So it's like, in some sense, like in the human cost, even though it appears like it affects younger people at first, it's going to affect all of us if it does at all. So of course, it's in our interest to argue to the funders, regardless of what stage of career we are in, to somehow arrest that from happening. So I guess we have time for maybe one last.
I'm potentially thinking about the world maybe 10 years from now, with the possibility that, yes, every part of the mathematical or computer science research process is entirely automated, and there is not a human need. Between now and then, what do you think is the most effective way to ensure that if we end up in that situation, let's say, that we're actually like doing so in a way that's beneficial for humanity 10 years from now? I think one of you mentioned earlier that, you know, there are research ideas and like methodology that comes out of theoretical computer science and so on that would be useful for the problem of AI alignment and safety. And so, how do you think that this can actually be like utilized in like a practical manner?
I think if we had good solutions for AI alignment, the companies would use it. So at the end of the day, we all have, the companies and us and all humanity have the goal of having a good life on Earth. And I think it's true that currently companies are in some crazy race to success, you know, of their own, and you know, they may not have, they may not work as much as they should on the problem of AI alignment because they're in a kind of race to make it. And hence I think it's our job to try to solve this problem. And I think if we make, whatever that means to solve, to work on this problem, I should say, and I do think that if we make progress, then it will be implemented. But we need to make good progress. Currently, we don't have good solutions for the problem. Either not at all efficient or not even the definitional, depending on what you're looking at. But I think there's a lot of work to be done in that, and I think if we do good work, then I do think it will be implemented and can have a huge impact. That's why I encourage all of us to think about these things.
Yeah, I think, no, I totally agree with what you've done. Yeah, and I guess also, I would really argue against the impulse to be completely fatalistic about this. It's very easy to say, oh, I'm taking the transitive closure of what's happening, and you know, AI will just do everything. And you know, maybe that will happen. right? There's a non-zero probability of that. But, you know, I think it's not simply wishful thinking to say that human beings are incredibly adaptable, right? We are actually remarkably good at looking at some new condition that is adverse to ourselves and figuring out something we can do in that situation. And I think it doesn't work in our favor to sort of say it's over, the AI is doing everything. We should say, like, what is my comparative advantage in this situation, right? If the AI gets to a certain point, how do I do something with that? How do I contribute? Because the world is vast, right? Like, internally, the space of mathematical research is vast. Externally, the entire world is vast. There's a lot the AI literally does not know about it. It does really pretty badly at the moment. And so it's a leap to say it'll be doing everything in 10 years. I realize it's a leap that, you know, Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google DeepMind say, but you should remember that these are for-profit companies that are trying to sell you a product, right? And that product is based on you believing that it will do everything. That doesn't mean it's true. And so I think thinking of yourself as someone who's capable of adapting to new situations and is versatile, I think is going to be one of the better strategies for actually approaching the next few years.
So, I mean, I understand the value of thinking about AI alignment, but I'm not sure it's actually a solution to your concern because we don't know whose values the AI will be aligned with. So, from that perspective, you know, my view is that what the most valuable thing to do is to think about the future where we might have some control, where the situation is not very clear where things are going to go. In that future, we should focus on what we can do today. And as I said at the beginning, I'm worried about homogenization of scientific research. That can also be interpreted as concentration of who controls all the AI tools. So it's a very delicate question. If you believe that there might be superintelligence, then maybe you want one of them that's fully aligned with some values, again, whose values. And if you believe that we're not heading towards superintelligence, then maybe what you want to think about more is how to make sure that there are multiple balanced forces which control these tools.
Just a cynical take, I can say, do you know how to survive a bear chasing you? How many of you know how to survive a bear chasing you? Good, people will survive. You run faster than your friend. So, you know, with John, that, you know, basically the world is vast, there'll still be somebody slower. You'll be fine.
Okay, so on that note, on a very optimistic note, just